Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. So I want to say good evening to everyone. Thanks for joining us and, of course, giving me the opportunity to share. I see a lot of familiar faces, even past clients. So for those of you which I've had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Pierre Papineau with Overview Property Inspection. So I'm a certified professional inspector, as James has shared. We do residential and commercial inspections, and we've been in the business now for about, give or take, 5 years. It's kind of ironic as I share 5 years. And so on occasion, I'll have clients ask, how long have you been doing inspections for? And I'll joke and say about 2 weeks. Some of the facial expressions that I get from clients, pretty priceless. Well, we're no longer been in the business for 2 weeks. There was a time where we were in business for 2 weeks, and writing a report on a dilapidated house or deferred maintenance house could take 5 to 7 hours when we initially started doing the inspections. So I want to talk to you guys about a few things. Okay. So while James would share, we're going to talk about maintenance. I want to be specific in what we're going to be talking about. Okay. And so we are going to be talking about property inspections, some tips on annual inspections, insight on quarterly inspections on your rental properties, how to, things to look out for, and my personal favorites, tools that you're going to need for your inspections. So amongst the craziness that is emerging, obviously in the Vancouver market, Edmonton market, I've had a few clients that have called us to do inspections after the fact. So they, put an offer because they want to be competitive, and so they've called us to do the inspection after they've closed their conditions. Well, while not ideal, of course, you have to be mindful that doing so could risk your hard-earned capital. So I actually have a client that recently called us to get some advice. She bought a property unconditional in Ontario, and lo and behold, she's now the owner of a mold infested house with structural issues, and she's holding the bag for the remediation costs. So I can't stress enough the importance of having someone on your team that'll look after your best interests. Okay. So when you're buying real estate, the monetary value to even have a home inspector walk through with you just to give you some insight is valuable. Okay. And I don't know whether Vancouver has this as a norm, but we are starting to see a lot of home inspectors offer sewer scopes. I can tell you, whether it's a new property or old property, we are saving clients tens of thousands of dollars. Again, it doesn't matter if it's 2012 or 2014. We actually did the sewer line inspection on a 4-year-old infill last year, where we actually saved the client $25K in a new sewer line. That's a long story, but yeah, as far as your due diligence, make sure that you're getting your sewer lines inspected as part of your due diligence. Okay. So I want to do the presentation with asking questions. So if you got questions, put it down below, and then I'll get around to answering a little bit later. But to stay engaged, I'm going to ask you guys, what is the worst thing for your house? So hands down, water is the worst thing for homes. Now, when we are building houses, the materials that we're using are subject to rot. They're subject to, decay. We're not building them so that we allow for air movement like we used to back in the day. And then building materials, frankly, they can't withstand moisture for very long. So we have to be mindful if we are going to build with the materials that are available to us in the marketplace. We have to come up with different solutions to manage liquid. Okay, so there's different forms of liquid that we got to be mindful about. There's liquid volume from rain, snow, but there's also forms of water vapors like humidity. Okay, and so this is where I'm going to focus my attention on. There's a lot of components that we can talk about, but we're going to specifically talk about this. I think it's very important, especially with newer properties where the envelope is airtight. Okay, so when I refer to water management with clients, everyone will automatically assume we are referring to gutters. We are talking about downspouts. We are talking about the topography. And so while these are very, very important aspect to manage the water, as our mortgage broker has shared, because of the number of claims, we want to be aware of the humidity inside the house. Now, keep that in mind. Now, depending on the era of construction, these items will affect your house if it's a newer or older property. Okay, so I want to talk about HVAC, and another question I got for you guys is, what does HVAC stand for? Okay, well, HVAC stands for heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. Okay, a house is designed with a lot of different systems and components that work in conjunction with one another. Okay, so if you have one in disrepair, or as James puts it, deferred maintenance, it can affect the house and in particular the indoor air quality. So when talking about the indoor air quality, we want to be mindful of a few things. Okay, so we want to consider the temperature, in particular the wintertime. We want the temperature inside the house, the humidity levels. We want to focus on the fresh air intake, the combustion air intake, the exhaust flues for the furnace, hot water heater, bath fans, HRV if applicable, furnace filters, just to name a few. Okay, so we're going to dive in on how I like to do my maintenance inspections so that when you guys go and review your HVAC systems, you can have a little bit of insight. Okay, so the first thing I always do is when doing the inspection, I will always start the exterior first. And what I want to do is I want to focus my attention on a macro perspective. Okay, so I stand about 100 feet away from the property and I'm just looking, and I walk the property in one direction and look at things in a micro perspective. And then I will go around the property in the other direction. Okay, so because we're focusing on HVAC, we are only looking and talking about those conditions. Okay, so what we are looking at, we're going to be looking at the fresh air intakes. We are going to look at the exhaust pipes. We want to look at the condition of the exhaust hoods. Where are they discharging? Are they on the roof? Are they on the wall? Etc. Okay, so once we are familiar with the exterior terminations, I want to remember a few points. Okay, so we're going to review the temperature of inside the house. Okay, we want to maintain a consistent temperature when we are in particular Edmonton, Vancouver not so much, but there's an ideal temperature that we want to keep our house at. And from experience and also new home warranty, the consistent temperature we want to maintain is 21 degrees or higher. Okay, so the way a house works is the higher the ambient air, the more moisture can be held with the ambient air. If you have, say, 21 degrees, you're going to have a good relative humidity. You can go up to 35%. If you go, say, 20, you're going to be a little bit lower and so forth. Okay, so if the higher temperature, you're less likely to have condensation on windows. Keep in mind, the higher temperature you have in the house, your glass surface will remain warmer as well. Okay, now I want you guys to do an experiment. This is particular to Albertans, okay? So when we are undergoing the next cold snap, hopefully not for another 200 days, start by setting your temperature or your thermostat at 20 degrees on the first day, okay? On the second day, on the first day, you're gonna look at 20 degrees. Second day, check to see how much condensation you have or frost in the windows. Then do 21, and then keep a log or just keep a mental note of those things, and then do 22 and then 23 and so forth. You'll begin to understand that as the house is warmer, you get less of those concerns. If you've got a newer house, this is very important. Okay, so I live in an older property. I've got some newer windows, some are dual panes, some are newer, older, doesn't matter. I've also got triple panes. I found that as I kept my temperature at 22 degrees, I've got windows that are from the 70s, 80s, give or take, and I had no ice accumulation because I kept my relative humidity lower and thus improving my indoor air quality. Okay, so you want to ensure the humidity levels are managed. Well, how is that done? Okay, there's a few things that I want you guys to be mindful about, but I want to ask another question. Who has ever heard of attic rain? Okay, for those of you that are unfamiliar with attic rain, it's a condition where essentially what happens is you get excess frost from inside the house because the humidity levels are too high. And then as we turn the furnace on, that humidity levels will escape into the attic and then freeze onto the roofing assembly. Okay. Of course, when it warms up, all that frost accumulation will melt and then you're creating water damage. I've seen mold. Actually, I've seen attics with like 3 or 4 inches of frost accumulation on the assembly. So I can't stress enough the importance of managing the humidity levels. And so you can manage the humidity levels quite easily, actually. Okay. By ensuring you're monitoring, the first sign I should talk about is you're identifying if you've got excess ice buildup on the windows, doors, and then another telltale indicator would be if your water supply coming to the property is starting to condensate. Okay. In particular, if you got older copper, pretty notorious for that to condense. Okay, so that's a good time to start considering buying a hydrometer, okay, or moisture meter. Okay, a lot of newer smart thermostats will have these features built in. And so another telltale indicator, if you're out shopping for real estate and you're thinking of buying a newer property with a tighter envelope, I mean from 2009 building code and up, look for streaking along the siding. Okay, in Vancouver, you guys are required to have a drainage plane or an air gap between the cladding and the wall assembly, where in Alberta, it's common practice for us to put the siding, vinyl siding, intimate to the wall, where we don't allow that drainage plane or ventilated cavity. Okay, so in Alberta, look for signs of water going down the assembly. In particular, at the base of bathrooms, you'll see it leaching from the soffits. That's the first telltale indicator that there's been moisture issues or attic rain. Okay, so look out for those conditions. Now, how do you manage the relative humidity inside the house? Frankly, it's quite easy. Run your bath fan or exhaust while you're bathing, and up to 20 minutes afterwards. You're going to want to run the exhaust hood while you're cooking. Now, important things to consider is exhausts. They all need to exhaust the exterior. Okay. It's always best approach to avoid exhausting through the attic if you can avoid it. Remember, terminations are always best on the wall assembly. If you remember anything from this presentation, I see it all too often where bath fans aren't properly connected in the attic. In particular, when you've got a dryer that's going from the main floor suite right up. And so if you have a bath fan or an exhaust that is vertically, the chances of frost and condensation emerging in that exhaust vent is very high. And so by installing a bath fan with a section that lays flat on the drywall and then goes up, it allows actually the moisture to collect in the bath fan exhaust pipe and then naturally evaporating on its own. Okay, Vancouver, again, this presentation is specific to Edmonton. Okay, now also the bath fans we talked about. Some properties, if you were built prior to 2003, you'll have a ventilation switch. Now, a ventilation switch, it usually can be found if you got a two-story house, it'll be upstairs in the main hallway or on the main floor next to the thermostat. They usually install about 6 feet off the ground, and on occasion, it will be labeled ventilation switch. Okay. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the ventilation switch, essentially what it does, it'll turn on a bath fan at usually the primary bath fan in the hallway, and then it will simultaneously turn on the furnace to create a simultaneous air exchange. Okay, so ventilation switch. A couple things you can do. You can actually install a ventilation switch that is programmable. We have switches now that you can set for 7 days a week, and it can run for 52 cycles a day. And so they're relatively inexpensive. So if you're anything like me, it's a cheap insurance to ensure that your rental property has that consistent air exchange. Okay. Also, humidifiers. Managing the humidity from the humidifier is hands down the #1 cause for the excess humidity in the house that we're seeing. And so a good option is if your humidifier is starting to become older, if you got an L40 or the old drum style, just replace it with a newer style. Now, in particular, you want to install the style that has an outdoor sensor. Those units are, they're looking at $700-800. But what it does is the outside temperature will tell you what the RH levels are outside. And also the control on the inside will forecast what it is on the inside and adjust the humidity levels automatically. Or if it's for a rental property, just disconnect the humidifier entirely and just don't tell your tenants. Okay. But don't tell anyone. So as we are talking about managing the humidity, you want to make sure that all the systems that you're using to manage the humidity and also to extract the humidity are properly maintained. Okay. So a few things that we want to look for. #1, we're going to talk about how to test your bath fans, your furnace filters, and all that kind of stuff. So bath fans, pretty easy to test. All you're doing is you're going to go in every single bathroom. You're going to take a piece of tissue or toilet paper, and you're going to install it on the grill while the fan is running. If the piece of toilet stays up, you know it's extracting the air as it should. Okay. Now, if you've got a fancy bathroom, you're seeing some staining on the ceiling, you may want to consider putting a better fan in, which has a minimum of 100 CFM. If you have a steam shower in your rental property or in your primary residence, you have to ensure you're putting a 200 CFM fan in place. Okay. My favorite brand, there's lots of Home Depot ones with auto sensors and stuff like that, but hands down Panasonic. We've had Panasonic exhaust fans in some of the rentals that are 10 years old, and they're working beautifully. So check for your exhaust fans. Now, same approach can be done with your range hood. Ensuring that your range hood is extracting the air is quite easy. Just tissue, same thing, pretty easy. Okay. Now, dryers, we know that will produce a lot of humidity in the house as well. So when you are looking at your dryer, check for your connections. Look at the back of the dryer. Is there a ton of lint accumulation? Lint accumulation is obviously a telltale indicator that you're getting some spillage of the moisture that occurs with the drying cycle. So just look at that. A couple things to be mindful about with your dryer exhaust. Okay. Number one, you want a solid pipe. That's hands down the most important. It's got to be a smooth walled hard pipe. You can't use any screws in the pipe. So you can't use screws at the joints to connect it together. It has to be secured together with HVAC tape, specifically the silver tape. Okay. I've seen some contractor use a mastix around the dryer connections. That will fail with a little bit of movement as you're doing your connection. So make sure it's silver tape. Okay. Avoid using the red-green shows style duct tape. After 10 years, that stuff is brittle, falls apart, and you're going to be redoing it. Okay. Now, I have clients on occasion ask me, is it okay to use a section where it's a flexible hose? Because if you've got a main floor suite and you're utilizing the back entrance to slide the dryer in, of course, having a little section that is a foil flex is fine. But just ensure that the specific where it's going out the assembly is hard pipe. Okay. If you are venting through the attic, I'm seeing a lot where HVAC contractors will insulate up to the ceiling. That is not a proper installation. You need to ensure that you are insulating the pipe 3 feet from where the pipe goes to the exterior. So if you've got a ceiling on the inside of the house, you need 3 feet of insulation for best practice coming in. Okay. If you are going with a sidewall termination, same thing. You've got to insulate it 3 feet in. If you can insulate the pipe further, even better. Same thing should be done when you are insulating an exterior range hood. Insulating the inside of the pipe above the range hood, if it's on an exterior wall, is actually, it's a good idea. I've got a couple places where it wasn't insulated, and so we've got frost inside the pipe damaging the upper cabinet. Okay, so cheap insurance for you to undertake when you're doing your rentals. Okay. Furnaces. We all know furnace filters need replacement. That is the easiest thing for you to do. Okay. Why it's important? If your furnace filter is obstructing the airflow, you're going to affect the indoor air quality. Okay. It's always a good idea to ensure you are looking down a few flow registers to just ensure there's a balanced system. You're also wanting to see how dirty it is. It's a good idea to have your ducts cleaned every couple of years to ensure indoor air quality. Specifically, we're talking about humidity, indoor air quality, and so be mindful of that. Depending on the furnace filter size, if you've got a 1 or 2 inch, it's every 3 months. If you've got a 4 to 5 inch style, the bigger ones, that could be as much as 6 months. Now, we're going to talk a little bit further on furnace filters a little bit later, but let's talk about HRVs. Here's another question for you. Who knows what an HRV is? Okay, so HRV stands for heat recovery ventilator. I know Vancouver, in particular BC, has had HRVs for a long time, or energy recoveries is what you guys refer to them on occasion. You got to make sure if you've got a newer property and that's your primary exhaust system, that you are maintaining that component. Okay. Now, we used to use bath fans. Modern building code and energy efficiency are requiring improved techniques. And so if you've got an HRV, the inside cartridges and the pre-filters, it's every 4 to 6 months, depending on the brand. Okay. One highlight I have to stress with you guys, you never want to operate the dampers that open and close manually. You will damage the system. I've come across 3 or 4 units that homeowners didn't know any better, and as a result, they're replacing the HRV components, which is like $300 or $400 for those little motors. Okay, so Mechanical dampers inside the HRVs, you don't touch them, okay? Now, when you are reviewing the system, whether it works properly, all you're doing is you press the button on the kill switch and just see if the dampers open and close on their own, okay? That's how you can test that system. So once we are familiar with like the inside components, so the exhaust, the dryer connections, your range hood exhaust, we want to return back to the exterior. Okay. Now, before we do so, we want to make a mental note of how many exhaust fans we have. We want to make a mental note of how many range hoods we have and dryers. Okay. Also make note of how many furnaces you have. That will dictate how many fresh air intakes you'll have and also how many penetrations there should be. So when we go back to the exterior, we are looking at the components from there. Okay, so we've got our notes. We're checking every exhaust. We want to make sure that the dampers open and close freely. Okay, we are going to be ensuring that we don't have any exterior plastic exhaust hoods. Plastic exhaust hoods are notorious for delaminating within 10, 15 years. And so if you do have them, be proactive, replace them, because it's just a matter of time where you're going to need to. Okay. Dryers, again, they've got to be metal. Okay. So one thing you want to be mindful about is if you have a newer property, what happens on occasion is the prevailing winds will come in and push the exhaust hoods open. Okay. And so what you can do is actually put a piece of weather stripping around the opening. So as the flapper opens from the prevailing winds, you don't hear that tick, tick, tick nuisance sounds. And as we know, Edmonton is notorious for winds. And so a little bit of insight on what you can do to avoid that nuisance dinging that we on occasion have. Okay. That will be predominant on wall terminations. Okay. Not so much on the roof. Okay. So next, we're going to be looking at the fresh air intakes. Okay. You're going to take a tissue. While everything is running, you're putting that tissue on the fresh air intake on the furnace fresh air and also the HRV if applicable. Okay. If the tissue is being held in place, you know it's working. The fresh air intakes are notorious for sediment, pollen accumulation. And so you have to be proactive to clean those off with a soft bristle brush. If you leave it unattended, what happens is it becomes clogged. Okay. If you have a suited property, and let's say you've got 3-4 people on the main floor, let's say you got a 1,500 square foot or 1,200 square foot main floor, and you got 3 or 4 occupants. The amount of humidity produced by those people will be pretty significant. And if you can't have the fresh air coming in that is controlled either the ventilation switch or by the furnace, you're not going to be quite happy with, number one, the smells when you visit the property. Number two, the indoor air quality. And obviously the humidity levels will affect the building materials. They'll expand prematurely. The joints on the hardwood will start to separate, laminate flooring, and so forth. Okay. So make sure you're testing your fresh air intakes, making sure you're cleaning them. What we do is we go around annually to check them out. Okay. So as far as dryers, we want to make sure that it's lint free essentially. Okay. While the dryer is running, it's a good idea just to look at things, make sure everything's opening up as it should. The big box stores, they'll sell an exhaust brush that for under $100, you can clean your exhaust on your own. There's usually 25-foot lengths. And so if you're going wall termination, you should be able to, buy the run-of-the-mill one from the big box store. They need to be cleaned annually because of lint buildup. Okay. Make sure that you're also checking the lint traps inside the rental properties. All right. So now that you know how many and you've checked all of the exhausts, just go back and count how many there are. Okay. You may have some that are on the roof. So if you don't have a proper ladder, looking back from a distance with binoculars will be beneficial. Okay. Now on newer properties, if you have a rear cantilever or a side cantilever, it's common to have fresh air intakes under the decks or even exhausts. You have to be mindful of maintaining proper separations between the ground. Okay. Code is you got to maintain at least 12 inches above anticipated snow levels. Well, if you need elaboration on that, it's always best approach to refer back to the installation manual. Code on occasion is a little bit wishy-washy. But if you do have questions with that, feel free to shoot me an email. I've got, the code book readily available. For those of you that aren't familiar, the 2019 building code you can get online through a PDF, and it's free of charge. So a little bit of insight for you. Okay. So maintaining the anticipated snow lines, look underneath the deck. If you can't find one, it's the worst thing having under the deck. If you do have a few terminations underneath the deck, you got to ensure that you're leaving the skirting open for enough airflow so that everything can exhaust properly. Okay. I hate seeing fresh air intakes underneath the deck because number one, no one ever installs a proper finish. It's always dirt. And so you're always going to pull that dirt in. Okay. So once everything is running and you're satisfied with the condition, everything, you're going to go back inside. You've given everything, 15, 20 minutes to run. You're going to go back inside. And now we're checking for the furnace. We're looking at any leaks that is emerging in the condensate. We are looking a few things with respect to humidity levels. So exhaust, we're looking at all the connections. We are looking at the furnace for any leaks. We want to make sure the HRV is properly discharging into the floor drain and making sure that there's always an air gap between the condensate drain and also the HRV drain. Okay. You don't want the drain going right into the floor drain and to create siphonage to bring back the sewer water back into the drain. Pretty silly, right? Well, we see it more than I'd like to admit, frankly. So a couple things that you have to be mindful about. Suited properties are huge in Edmonton. I don't know about Vancouver. I can imagine there are more, but relative humidity from humans is quite high. One human can produce up to 1 kgs of water vapors per day. Now imagine if you got a 1,200 square foot suited property, there's 5 or 6 people in there. That is a ton of moisture. And especially if it's a new property, like if you're buying a West Jasper place, like a lot of people are buying, the envelopes are airtight. You have to be mindful and maintain your mechanical system. That air exchange is so important, okay? Especially on newer building code, newer properties that are utilizing the 2019 building code, okay? So if you're completing this for a property, I want you to be mindful about doing quarterly inspections. Why? Well, you don't reside in that property, frankly, and you want to be on top of your property, okay? So whether you're doing your maintenance inspection or if you're hiring a property inspection company or management company to do, ask them what their policy is for that. A lot of big time property management companies won't do quarterly inspections, okay? So what you can do to look after your best interest is, I always tell clients, leave a boatload of furnace filters on site. There's no point in you going back and forth and uploading or in carrying furnace filters. Okay. What we do, my wife is very good at managing the rental properties. Okay. And so what we do is every property we have the make and model of every furnace or appliance in that property. We'll have the furnace make and model. We'll have the filter size of each property. And so if we, for whatever reason, can't go, we got to send the handyman. We already have everything specific readily available so that he can just stop at the big box store, pick up what he needs, and then go to the property. So it's not going to the property, getting charged for time and travel, because time is money, and then going back to the rental. So be proactive with those little things because it could save you a bunch of money. Okay. Now, there's obviously a lot of automation that we can do if you're a smaller real estate investor. There's a lot of automation you can do with tenants. Okay. If you can actually, in your phone, on your schedule now feature, you can actually send a quarterly reminder to tenants just to check in, even monthly. It's like, hey, how's it going? And then based on having your contact list or having your tenants saved in your contact list, if someone responds with an issue, you're more aware of it ahead of time. Because as we know, a lot of tenants aren't very good at like telling you or sharing some issues. But if you have that open conversation with them, and so by just programming your phone and saying, hey man, what's going on? You don't even think about it. Once a year, you just sit in your phone, do all that automation, and then the tenants get that text. And number one, it creates that relationship. Number two, they'll think you care. Obviously, they'll likely look after your property a little bit better, or chances are they will. And then it's just caring about your consumer. Okay. So with that, also a couple things with your tools that you're going to need to do your reviews or your inspections. Hands down, you need a quality flashlight. Okay, 500 lumens or more is ideal. You need gloves, of course. You're going to need safety goggles, soft bristle brush to clean off the fresh air intakes, a ladder if you've got a bungalow, binoculars if you've got a 2-story house, or if you don't have the proper equipment, then you could always, hire a company to do that stuff for you. There's contracted companies that will go and do your annual inspections for you. We do offer it as well. But as far as your checklist, we are putting together a annual checklist for people. We're going to be releasing in the coming week. So if you want a hold of that checklist for your annual maintenance, send us a message on Facebook, and the office will get back to you and send you a copy in the next coming weeks. Okay. And so, is there any questions that or clarity that people need?